Hello and welcome to Quiz Class. I'm your host, Ellen, and today we have 100 questions on trivia. Let's take a look at our Quiz Class awards. And of course, our categories for today. And today we will begin with geospatial technology. It's going to be a hard one. Which of the following systems was an early example of geospatial technology of the current GPS? Navstar, LoRaWAN, or Baidu? LoRaWAN. Which software became popular for GIS mapping once it first appeared in the late 1980s? ArcInfo, MapInfo, or AutoCAD? ArcInfo. What was used for aerial data collection before satellite imagery? Aerial photography, balloon photography, or pigeon photography? Aerial photography. What was the primary function of WGS-84 when first developed? Navigation, timekeeping, or weather forecasting? Navigation. Which company launched the first commercial Earth observation satellite? GeoIQ, Planet Labs, or Digital Globe? Digital Globe. What was the constraint on consumer GPS technology in the 1990s? High cost, low accuracy, or lack of satellites? Low accuracy. What was the first open source GIS software developed in the mid-1980s? QGIS, PostGIS, or GrassGIS? GrassGIS. Which technology transformed web-based mapping when it was first released in 2005? Google Earth, Google Maps, or ArcGIS Online? Google Maps. What key feature made MapQuest popular in the late 1990s? Street View maps, printable driving directions, or real-time traffic updates? Printable driving directions. What 1990s device did hikers use for navigation? Compass, paper maps, or GPS handheld devices? GPS handheld devices. Which satellite system was introduced by the EU in the early 2000s as an alternative to GPS? IRNSS, Galileo, or GLONASS? Galileo. Which 2004 platform allowed users to contribute to map creation? MapQuest, Google Maps, or OpenStreetMap? OpenStreetMap. Which geospatial technology helped farmers in the 1990s? GIS, GPS, or drones? GPS. Which 1970s geospatial concept introduced data, layer overlay for analysis. GIS, map overlay, or spatial interpolation. GIS. Which handheld device became a symbol of adventure in the early 2000s? Altimeter, the compass, or Garmin GPS? Garmin GPS. Which industry first adopted GIS for large-scale resource management in the 1980s? The military, utility, or real estate? Utility. In which decade did satellite remote sensing begin for environmental monitoring? The 70s, the 60s, or the 80s? The 1970s. Which country launched Landsat in 1972? China, the Soviet Union, or the United States? The United States. What data visualization on old maps uses lines to show elevation? Isoheights, contour lines, or point clouds? Contour lines. Which mid-1990s web mapping service provided directions but lacked live traffic updates? MapQuest, Google Maps, or Yahoo Maps? MapQuest. Let's move over to economic geography for question 21. Which city was first classified as a world city for economic influence? Paris, Amsterdam, or London? Amsterdam. Which country was the largest producer of tungsten in the 1950s? China, Bolivia, or South Korea? China. Which city became a cotton trade hub due to the Erie Canal? Boston, Buffalo, or Chicago? Buffalo. Which theory believed that colonization was needed for raw materials and markets? Mercantilism, dependency theory, or imperialism of free trade? Mercantilism. Which city was known as the Pittsburgh of the South for its steel industry? Atlanta, Birmingham, or Charlotte? Birmingham. Which country experienced shock industrialization in the 20s and 30s? Italy, Brazil, or the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union. What was the dominant economic activity in Southeast Asia in the 1800s? Oil extraction, agriculture and fishing, or rubber and spice production? Rubber and spice production. Where did the Marshall Plan focus on rebuilding economies after World War II? Latin America, Southeast Asia, or Western Europe? Western Europe. Which European country in the 1970s was called the sick man of Europe? Spain, Greece, or the United Kingdom? The United Kingdom. Which state saw an economic boom in the 1970s due to oil discoveries? Texas, Alaska, or Louisiana? Alaska. Which industry was a lifeline during the Great Depression? Oil, agriculture, or manufacturing? Agriculture. Which industry in Mexico was most impacted by NAFTA in 1994? Textiles, tourism, or manufacturing? Manufacturing. Which economic model emphasized local resource use and self-sufficiency? Export-led growth, Rostow's stages of growth, or import substitution industrialization? Import substitution industrialization. Which former British colony became a global financial hub in the 1960s? Jamaica, Singapore, or Hong Kong? Hong Kong. Which country's economy in the early 1900s was shaped by the coffee trade? Brazil, Colombia, or Ethiopia? Brazil. Which concept describes the advantage of early industrialized cities? First mover advantage, comparative advantage, or agglomeration economies? First mover advantage. Which African country thrived in the 1980s due to diamonds? Kenya, Nigeria, or Botswana? Botswana. Which region was known for tiger economies in the late 20th century? East Asia, South America, or Southeast Asia? East Asia. Which 19th century theory proposed wages would settle at a subsistence level? Malthusian theory, classical economics, or Keynesian economics? Malthusian theory. Which city symbolized deindustrialization in the early 1990s? Detroit, Cleveland, or Pittsburgh? Detroit. Cultural studies for question 41. Which theorist coined the term cultural circuit? Stuart Hall, Paul de Gay, or Raymond Williams? Raymond Williams. Which subculture was associated with breakdancing in the late 20th century? Grunge, hip-hop, or new wave? Hip-hop. The Frankfurt School critiqued which of the following? Capitalism and mass culture, feminism and gender studies, or nationalism and cultural heritage? Capitalism and mass culture. Which early 1990s TV show satirized American family life and consumerism? Roseanne, The Simpsons, or Married with Children? The Simpsons. Who pioneered the concept of the public sphere? Michel Foucault, Jürgen Habermas, or Marshall McLuhan? Jürgen Habermas. Antonio Gramsci's definition of cultural hegemony includes what? Global capitalism, social movement, or ruling class? Ruling class. Which 1960s UK subculture challenged working class culture? Mods, rockers, or skinheads? Mods. Who analyzed Orientalism in cultural studies? Edward Said, Franz Fanon, or Gayatri Spivak? Edward Said. Which cultural movement placed a strong emphasis on anti-materialism, spontaneity, and rebellion? Beat Generation, hippie movement, or counterculture movement? Counterculture movement. Which 1970s TV series highlighted women's issues? Good Times, Happy Days, or The Mary Tyler Moore Show? The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Who is known for the encoding-decoding model in cultural studies? Stuart Hall, Pierre Bourdieu, or Roland Barthes? Stuart Hall. Which 1980s film is discussed for its Cold War anxieties and consumerism? Blade Runner, Back to the Future, or E.T. the Extraterrestrial? Blade Runner. What does hybridity, according to Homi K. Babha, refer to? Blending of cultures, economic dominance, or cultural isolation? Blending of cultures. What cultural phenomena is portrayed in the 1990s film Trainspotting? Punk culture, racial tension, or drug addiction? Drug addiction. Which concept by Pierre Bourdieu links cultural practices and social class? Capital, habitus, or hegemony? Habitus. Which 1980s TV show portrayed African American middle class life? Family Ties, Full House, or The Cosby Show? The Cosby Show. Which 1970s music genre impacted identity, race, and class in urban environments? Disco, grunge, or hip hop? Hip hop. Who popularized the notion of imagined communities? Judith Butler, Benedict Anderson, or Michel Foucault? Benedict Anderson. Which theory suggests audiences can negotiate or resist cultural texts? Orientalism, structuralism, or reception theory? Reception theory. Which 1960s event symbolized the countercultural movement? Woodstock, the Summer of Love, or Altamont Free Concert? Woodstock. Let's move on to Earth science for question 61. Which era first saw complex multicellular life? Archean, Ediacaran, or Proterozoic? Proterozoic. What was the 1950s U.S. project to use nuclear explosions for construction? Project Vela, Project Plowshare, or Project Crossroads? Project Plowshare. Which 19th century theory suggested Earth's mountains formed from cooling? Contraction theory, continental drift theory, or plate tectonics theory? Contraction theory. Which 1960s space mission captured the first full image of Earth, creating the blue marble? Apollo 8, Apollo 11, or Sputnik 1? Apollo 8. What was the name of the ancient superocean around Pangaea? Tethys, Paleopacific, or Panthalassa? Panthalassa. What 1970s belief shifted to support hotspots driving volcanoes? Mantle convection, continental drift, or plate tectonics? Plate tectonics. What material was historically used in schools but is now avoided due to its carcinogenic properties? Talc, asbestos, or cinnabar? Asbestos. Which Mesozoic marine reptiles were dominant ocean predators? Nautiloids, trilobites, or plesiosaurs? Plesiosaurs. What term describes the 1950s practice of cloud seeding? Geoengineering, weather modification, or atmospheric engineering? Weather modification. Which theory suggests continents were fixed and oceans formed by sinking? Contraction theory, continental drift, or land bridge theory? Contraction theory. What was the name of the 19th century map depicting the open polar sea? Peary Race map, the Arctic map, or the Barents map? The Arctic map. What 1980s discovery changed our understanding of life in extreme environments? Coral reefs, cold seeps, or hydrothermal vents? Hydrothermal vents. Which of the oldest rivers in the world were disregarded in the early earth science research? Finke, New River, or the Yangtze? Think. Which mid-20th century hypothesis claimed mountains formed by vertical uplift? Diastrophism, geosyncline theory, or tectonic uplift theory? Geosyncline theory. Which event was caused by Mount Tambora's 1816 eruption? The Dust Bowl, global cooling, or the year without a summer? The year without a summer. What forgotten term in early Earth science referred to Earth's continental crust? Thiol, knife, or hydrosphere? Thiol. Which 20th century theory claimed ecosystems reach stable equilibrium? Gaia hypothesis, dynamic equilibrium, or climax community theory? Climax community theory. Which early 20th century phenomenon caused ice boulders to wash ashore? The ice storm, ice flows mystery, or Bermuda ice event? Ice flows mystery. In the 1970s, polar wandering suggested that the Earth's magnetic poles move over time. Which 1990s disaster film popularized supervolcanoes despite scientific inaccuracies? Volcano, Twister, or Dante's Peak? Dante's Peak. Blockbuster movies. For question 81. Which 1990s film featured My Heart Will Go On? Titanic, Armageddon, or Pretty Woman? Titanic. What was the working title of the 1977 Star Wars movie? The Star Wars, Space Wars, or The Adventures of Luke Starkiller? The Adventures of Luke Starkiller. Which 1985 blockbuster was originally written for Michael J. Fox, but he was cast later? The Goonies, Ghostbusters, or Back to the Future? Back to the Future. Which 1993 film pioneered CGI to create realistic creatures? Jurassic Park, Independence Day, or Terminator 2, Judgment Day? Jurassic Park. The bullet dodging scene in The Matrix was inspired by which movie? Dark City, Total Recall, or Blade Runner? Dark City. What 1994 action thriller almost got canceled and took place on a bus? Speed, The Rock, or Die Hard with a Vengeance? Speed. What was the original name for Jaws? Beast of the Deep, Jaws of Death, or the Amityville Horror? Jaws of Death. Which actor turned down the role of Neo in The Matrix? Brad Pitt, Will Smith, or Tom Cruise? Will Smith. What major effect in Terminator 2 consumed most of the film's $100 million budget? Liquid metal effects, explosions and chase sequences, or Arnold Schwarzenegger's digital enhancements? The T-1000 liquid metal effects. Which 1981 adventure movie was inspired by 1930s and 40s serials? Flash Gordon, Conan the Barbarian, or Raiders of the Lost Ark? Raiders of the Lost Ark. What was the working title for E.T. that sounded like a horror film? The Alien, Night Skies, or The Visitor? Night Skies. Which 1986 fantasy film flopped but became a cult classic? Willow, Labyrinth, or Howard the Duck? Howard the Duck. Which 1995 film was marketed as the summer's biggest disaster movie? Twister, Apollo 13, or Volcano? Twister. Which director spent 12 years developing technology for his 2009 sci-fi blockbuster? Ridley Scott, Peter Jackson, or James Cameron? James Cameron. Which action hero film from 1984 was first titled The Hunter? Beverly Hills Cop, Conan the Destroyer, or The Terminator? Beverly Hills Cop. What was the first blockbuster to use digital morphing technology? Willow, The Abyss, or Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan? Willow. Which 1996 alien invasion film destroyed landmarks like the White House? Stargate, The Fifth Element, or Independence Day? Independence Day. Which actor was originally considered for Aragorn before Viggo Mortensen? Russell Crowe, Nicolas Cage, or Stuart Townsend? Stuart Townsend. Which 1970s sci-fi blockbuster used kit bashing for its special effects? Alien, Star Wars, or The Black Hole? Star Wars. And for question 100, which 1990s action blockbuster switched from practical stunts to extensive CGI? True Lies, The Matrix, or Mission Impossible? The Matrix. And our bonus question for today, who is the main character in The Lion King? Let us know the answer in the comments. And let's take a look one more time at our quiz class awards. Remember to let us know how you rank and, of course, the answer to the bonus question. As always, thanks for playing this quiz. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you in our next one. Bye-bye.